The next thing I want to do is I want to show you some neat techniques as far as using it as a positive medium as opposed to a negative medium inside of a mold. Okay. What we're going to do here is we're going to work with the... Now we're going to work with this little guy here. He's our little woodland guy that we made the very first one of these sponsor streams that I did. And what I was showing is I was showing how to sculpt without using a armature. We basically built up in layers and did a series of layers built over and over again that allowed us to create this cute little guy here. But he's sadly missing some texture. So we're going to do some texture buildup on this guy using the liquid clays as well. And we're going to allow us to do some faux finishes with it. What we're going to do is we're going to work with gold, and we're going to work with, I want the white, some of the white, some of the gold, and again with some of the black. Okay, now you're like, but Paul, those are not wood colors. Absolutely, they are not. I'm going to show you how to do some of the wood texture or different colors using all these. Now, Sculpey does not have a full line of colored clays that are available. These are pretty much it. But with using some tints that we have, and the tints that we're going to be using are powdered tints, we're going to be able to get some different color and technique in here. But I want to show you using just these three colors right here how to get some texture applied to some of the figures here. So we're going to add a little bit of the gold here to our tray. Okay, and we've already got some black, we've got some of the translucent, and then I'm going to add a little bit of white to where we had white before. Okay, so there's our colors there. We got the gold here, we got the black, we got translucent, and we got some white, even though it's hard to see. Okay, so I'll put these back kind of out of the way here, just so that we can work on our little guy here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to be doing a buildup of clay and texture, and the way that we're going to be able to do that is by applying texture with the brush, baking it while it's still raised, and then adding to it. Okay, so that is the technique that we're going to be using. Now I'm going to show you a couple different techniques with this. One of them is starting with stippling, and stippling is the tappa 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 that we talked about doing earlier. Stippling is going to give us the most random approach, and that's going to give us a pockmark a feel to it. Okay, so if we were to say that perhaps the upper part of this arm had some moss on it and such, we can come in here with the gold, and we're going to apply. Now, we don't want to overwork this. We actually want the clay to have thickness to it. Okay, so we don't want to overwork this material in there. So once we place it, okay, let it be thick in some places, let it be thin in other places, and we're going to constantly work this material up higher and higher to create texture. So we're going to get our heat gun out and heat it. And again, I'm looking for that shine change, the change in the shininess of the material. Come back in here, and over the same areas, we're just going to work in smaller and smaller points on this as we're building it up. So as we have, a lot like working when you're doing faux finishes with rust and stuff, you don't want to keep painting over the entire thing, otherwise you're just going to add a lot of thickness overall. You want to work in the small areas that you had and keep building up and up in those smaller and smaller areas. So think of it like a pyramid. So you'd start with a wide base, then you smaller and smaller every time you go up. Okay, now if we wanted to, we can come in here and we're going to add a little bit more texture running down the arm. Now this, since it is a liquid, it's going to want to puddle. It's going to find the path of least resistance to create so it's going to smooth itself out over time, which is why you want to hit it as quickly as you can with the brush, and you want to or with the heat gun, and you want to keep it as thick as you can. But another thing that we can do is if you've got something that's got a little bit of texture to it, this is just a little bit of foam, but it's an open cell foam, so it's got a lot of, it's rougher than my brush is. We can actually come in here and actually texturize the clay before we hit it. now so that we can actually see what I'm doing here, because this gold is fairly monochromatic, I'm going to, we're going to add a different color. We're going to use some of the black here, just so I can show you that we actually have some texture buildup here. Actually happening. And I'm using this a lot like a paint, but it's a paint with thickness. It's like a puff paint, but it's a clay. And so it bonds really well to the other clay. Okay, so we can actually get some really nice buildup of thickness here. So Greek has a great question. He says, can you use the liquid clay to fill in tiny imperfections like fingerprints or brushstrokes? That's a great question, Greek. And let me show you the answer to that. Okay, now if we look here at the bottom, if I come in here and zoom in, you can see that we added texture here before. So now what we can do is I can actually come in here with some of this liquid clay. And this is an exaggeration because I put this really deep texture in here. This isn't a fingerprint. It's a, it's an intentional one. But we can come in here and actually use it almost like a spackle. To kind of fill that in. Now, give it a second to find its level. Okay? Just find just give it a second to find its level, and what that's going to do is it's going to settle in to the deeper parts of it. Now this clay is not going to dry on its own. You've got to heat it, and so that's going to allow it, so if you give it a second to just kind of sit there, it's eventually going to find that area that is the low spot and fill itself in. So now we can go in and cook it. Now, as you can see, it's smoothed that out. We've got a smoother finish in there, so we were able to actually kind of fill that in. Now, what you could do is, if you wanted to make sure that it's perfectly smooth after we got rid of some of the fingerprints, we can come in here with the sandpaper, because this is, again, just the polymer clay that we had there before. Okay, we can come in here and we can actually just hit it with a little bit of sandpaper, and that's going to take down any of the really, really high edges, but all the stuff is still filled inside there. And we could actually take this and fill it until it is completely smooth if we wanted to. So yes, if you want to use it as a filler, you can, absolutely. Okay, so now we have the texture in here as well. There's a little bit of the clay I forgot to cure on the side there. Haha. Now I would, again, when I'm done with this, throw this whole thing back into the oven just to kind of make sure that I've got a good solid cure on this whole thing. Now the other thing that you can do is I'm applying it with this brush, and then we're going in and we're actually stippling it again using our little bit of foam here. I'm going to cut myself a little bit of bigger piece of foam here. Find my blade. There we go. Okay, I like to use the torn edge, not the cut edge, because the cut edge is too clean. But I could actually come in here with the foam, just in the clay there itself, and just apply it as a texturizer as well. I mean, you don't need to use a brush and then come in and texturize it. You can actually straight up use the texturizer to come in and add textured clay to the arm there. Then we can go ahead and you want to cook it fairly quickly so that it doesn't find its level. Now, for those of you who've ever done any kind of makeup or any kind of really intensive skin techniques for painting, you'll notice what I'm doing here is very similar to what you would do when you're creating skin technique, is that you are building up layers over and over. So you can actually use this clay. We're going to add a little bit of white to the gold so we can start to build up opaqueness here. So while we are still adding texture, okay, we are actually adding depth too. So you can use this as a finish paint technique, or if you wanted to, just add the texture to it and then paint it manually when you're done using acrylics or oils or enamels if you want to. Acrylics are going to work best to give you the keep the texture there. But as you can see, we're getting a lot of good texture in that. I'm going to bring this up to the cam here so you guys can see the texture really well here. Okay, there you go. It doesn't look like much up close because the color is weird, but I'm going to also paint it, okay, so that you can see it. Because if we get up in here up to like this area, we're starting to get a really nice like fish or scaly kind of feel to it. And I'm going to show you what that's going to look like, how that's going to benefit us when we paint it. So I'm going to do a really quick paint technique after I go get the ball that's out of the oven. I'm just going to use 2 colors of paint, and I'll show you why. We want to start, and much like the sculpting technique, we're going to start with the darker colors and then layer up from there. Okay. Let's start with this brush here. And that's the thing, is that we are doing, this is a Sculpey stream, but Sculpey finishes are quite diverse. We want to make sure that we, it's not just about the sculpting, it's also about the finishing. So we're going to come in here, we're going to add a little bit of paint, and I'm going to do this in really, really thin layer. And for those of you who have followed me at all ever, you know that I am a very big proponent in letting the clay do all the work. Okay? Are there paints that work best with Sculpey? It depends on the finish that you're after. That is a great question. I use acrylics mostly because they're easier to clean up, and I think that they give me a wider variety of textures and such. But they're not really great for being handled. If the piece is going to be handled, you either want to make sure that you gloss coat it, put a clear coat on it, or something like that. If you know it's a piece that's going to be handled a lot, enamels work really, really well. Okay, so now we have a really nice, good, clear coat on that. And so I'm going to hold it up to the camera here, and we're going to zoom back in. There we go. So you can see there's a lot of texture in there, okay? But what we're going to do to make that texture pop is we're going to do a little bit of dry brushing, okay? Because again, Paul likes it when the clay does the work for him. He doesn't want to have to actually, if you put the texture into the clay, into the sculpture, when you go to paint it, all you're doing is you're accenting the work that you already did. You don't have to go in there and work so hard to make it come back out, okay? Put the work into the clay, spend the time in the sculpture to actually put all that texture into it and such, and you're going to get a really, really easy paint job out of it, where you're just working in washes as opposed to trying to do a ton of faux finishes. Okay, so I'm going to take the paint here. I'm just going to take most of it out, the charge. We're going to take most of it out, and then we're just going to kind of come in here, and we're just dry brushing to pop the accent of the paint. Okay, and all that's going to happen is when you're dry brushing is you're just hitting the highest point on the texture, and you leave the lower parts of the texture the darker colors. Okay, so while it looks like I'm covering the entire thing, it's a really light brush stroke with very minimal paint on the brush. Okay, if I bring this back up to the camera, you can see how much texture that we've added. And I'm not, that's not paint texture, guys. That is the texture of the clay itself to give us that nice scaled, gnarly look. Now this side over here, perfectly smooth. Okay, this is a smooth Sculpey here. That's what we started with on this other side, but we started to add the texture using the liquid clay to give us this really kind of nice, gnarled, kind of barky kind of look to it. And then if we just use different colors of paint, we can help to accent that and really bring it forward. Okay, so that you are doing less work by putting the work into the texture itself. Now, if you notice, we started with a sculpt that was already cooked. Okay, so and then what we did is we ended up using the Super Sculpey, liquid Super Sculpey, to help us add some texture because we had a smooth sculpt to begin with. Okay, so it allows us to come in here and texturize when we're done. Now, if I had a lot of finite scratching and skin texture and stuff like that, obviously the liquid clay is going to cover that up. But this is a really nice way to take something that's smooth, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your sculpt that you're doing this to. That liquid clay will stick to pretty much anything, and as long as you can bake it, you'll be able to keep that texture on there. Okay, but yeah, that gives it a really, really nice rough texture onto that arm. That kind of gives it that barky look to it that we want there. This is a mold that I bought years ago. And it is basically for pressing clay between to create leaves. Okay, it kind of works. Okay, the problem is that the clay that you put into it, and I'll show you how it works really quickly. Work your clay, get it nice into in smooth. The problem that I have with this is that they did not account in the mold for there to be any thickness. Okay. Now you're like, well, but Paul, what does that matter? And I'll show you. Okay, so this mold is actually made to be part A and part B that fits perfectly together. Boom, like that. There's no thickness, there's no gapping in there. Okay, so when you go to add the clay to it and you squish it together, okay, soft mold, soft clay, you're not going to get much thinness to the piece. Okay, it's going to give me texture, a leaf texture on the top and bottom. It is, but that is one chunky leaf. Chunky. All right, so, and that's fine. I mean, it's fine. I would say it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 6. All right, I wouldn't sell it, but it does the job. But liquid clay, on the other hand. So I'm going to come in here with the black. Why black, Paul? That's a very good question. Thank you for asking, Paul. Actually, let's mix it up a little bit. We're going to do a little black and gold. The reason that is because we're going to end up painting this, because obviously most leaves aren't black or gold unless you're in outer space somewhere. Okay. But you want to always, if you're going to paint, you always want to start with your darkest colors. Okay. Chunky leaves are illegal in the UK. Well, that's good to know. All right, I noticed that my brush here is getting a little bit thick from all of this fun liquid Sculpey. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean it up a little bit using some naphtha. This is just that lighter fluid. Let's put it in here, and I'm just gonna help clean the brush out. Oh, I see all that chunky in there? We're just pulling all that chunky out. That's what we want. We want to get back to our brush being nice and clean. Let's beat the devil out of it. There we go. Okay, so now we're back to a nice, soft, supple brush. There we are. Put our naphtha to the side here. But now what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of black and a little bit of the gold, and we're going to paint it inside the leaf. Now we've got two sides of the leaf here. Okay, we've got, this is considered the top of the leaf, and this is the underside of the leaf. We want to use the underside of the leaf. Okay, because we're creating a negative. Okay, so we're just basically, like we were doing with the other mold, we're just painting this on. And then I'm going to show you a different technique. I'm going to show you something else that we can do here using our paints. Okay, once we're done with this side, and we're going to do it on the other side of this mold, just so I can show you guys how it works. So we're just getting some thickness on here. We're going to work in layers again, like we did with the other, with the sphere. Okay, so we've got that in there. All right, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna add another layer here. Okay, and we're coming in here, and I'm actually putting it in fairly thick. Okay, not quite spatula thick, but thick enough to give us some depth to it. So we don't have to do, 10 layers or whatnot. We just want enough to actually come in here and create So there we go. Got some nice thickness on that leaf there. Okay, now we can go ahead and cure this again. Now we're going to let this cure. Yep, let's let it cool just a little bit. Now, once that cools, we should be able to peel that leaf out and have a paper thin leaf that is actually made out of clay. Okay, obviously can't be handled very well, but we could actually have that come out there and be paper thin. Now, okay, let's see if we can pull the focus back up here. Now, believe it or not, that's all clay, guys. That is, and once it completely cures, you know, we can do more layers to kind of keep it, get it a little bit more thickness to it. But that is 100% clay using just the liquid, and it's got a lot of translucency. Okay. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a different technique, and we're gonna use, we're gonna do something that's a little bit fun here. Okay. We're going out of the box. All right, so we have our nice little clay leaf here that's made out of that copper, or that gold and that black kind of modeled together. All right, and now we're gonna do something a little bit different. Now for something completely different. Okay, I've got my acrylic paint here. Okay, and I got my brush. What we're going to do here is I'm going to paint the leaf. Now, the thing with silicone molds that I'm sure most of you know is nothing sticks to silicone but silicone. And we're using something like an acrylic paint. The binder in acrylic paint is water. And so water and silicone are a lot like water and oil. They don't mix very well. Okay, so you're going to notice some beading on there. That's okay. Now that's just acrylic paint, okay? And to kind of show you like why it's not that great, you know, I can just come in here and I can rub all the acrylic paint off of it. See, it doesn't do anything. Okay, so like acrylic paint on its own is fairly worthless when it comes to creating a mold, okay, or for molding pieces. But what we can do is come in here again. We're going to paint it. We're going to cure it again. And this doesn't just have to be for leaves. It can be with any other kind of mold, really. Now you might be thinking also, oh, Paul, well, why not just use regular clay and do this technique? And I'll show you why. So we're going to paint the other side of the leaf too, here, so you can see it. Now if I take some regular Super Sculpey and I try and push this into here, okay, I can get a really decent pull, or I can get it to stick. But you can see the clay is going to come off, and the paint is going to stick, but not very well, and it's going to be mottled. It's not going to attach to everywhere, even though I push the heck out of it into it, and the paint isn't really sticking. Okay, so that's pretty much just trash. But, he says, okay, so I'm going to eventually, and the nice thing about the silicone is nothing sticks to silicone but silicone, so you can always clean this up really, really easily. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same gold and black mix there. I have a little bit of gold, a little bit of black. And since we're not really forcing the clay over the paint, we're not going to ruin the paint. Okay, but what we are going to do is we're going to brush it in here, is we're going to bond that paint directly to the clay. Okay, this clay, because it is a liquid, it is going to bond and cure perfectly onto the paint here. And what it's going to do is it's going to make it so that the paint can't come off. Okay, you can't rub the paint off. It's going to bond to it as opposed to just being on the surface. Okay, so again, we're adding the liquid clay to it. And this is actually a technique that we use when we're doing silicone, like mold making or casting in resins, is that we will back paint into the molds with tint or other colors of resin. And we can use that same thing here with the clay to create permanently bonded clay parts. And now what I want to do is I want to take my paint again, and we're going to paint the top of the leaf here. But Paul, why don't we just paint the bottom of the leaf? Texture. Remember, when we're dealing with the texture of the leaf, when we're dealing with the texture of the mold and we're painting it in there, the paint is going to cover the surface of the mold, and it's also going to allow us to get the most texture out of it. And then as we backfill with the clay, we're still leaving all that texture there. Whereas, see how we're just painting over the top of it? We are basically, it's getting smoother and smoother here, okay? Now, we've got that on there. It's cured. I want to just make sure. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the clear and a little bit to this side, not much, just a little bit. I'm going to fill this side of the mold with the clear. Be better if I didn't have all the chunks of the paint in there, but it'll still allow us to do what I want to do here. So we're filling this side with texture and clay here, just the clear. One more. And this one we want to be just a little bit thicker, and I'll show you why. And this is clear. Remember, keep in mind, this is the clear, because now what we can do is close up our mold like that, okay? Then what we need to do is we need to wrap a rubber band around it or something like that to help keep it closed. Okay, and I'm gonna go pop this into the oven for 15 minutes. So when I'm cooking with the clay in my oven, I don't just put it on the blank shelf or on a cookie sheet or anything like that. I actually have a silicone mat that has some thickness to it. If you don't pour your own silicone, what I'd recommend is buying a silicone pad, cutting it in half and doing a few layers on it, and that's going to keep the bottom of the clay from burning. Okay, mine stays in. It's about that thick. The pad that I have, I made it myself. I poured it myself, and that allows me to create or to have it on there, so it still gets warm, and it'll still cook the clay, but it's not going to burn that bottom side, because as the heat rises, it has a tendency to be warmer on the bottom, and I just want to make sure that that it stays nice and not burnt. I don't want it to burn. Grim Harbor says, with the liquid clay, are you able to get different colors? Yes. Well, yes and no. The colors that you can get are gold, black, translucent, white, clear, pearl, and silver. These are the colors that are available. Okay. So how do we get other colors into it? Well, I just showed you one technique, and that is by back painting with an acrylic paint. Okay. Another one would be to add powder. Okay, powdered tint. So these are powdered pigments. Okay, and I've got a bunch of them. These are Pearl X ones. Okay, so these are more pearl colors, but you can get them in opaques as well. Okay, and the reason that we want to use a powder is because we don't want there to be we don't want to add any more liquid to the liquids. Okay, we want to make sure that the liquids stay as is. So this is basically just a powder. If I open it up, James's Dragons down. If I open it up, it is just literally a powder. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to use something either the translucent or the completely clear. All right, so we're going to add the clear in a little puddle here. And then using our brush that I'm going to clean out here. Okay, so we've cleaned out our brush here. I could use some naphtha if I want to, but we're going to just put it right back into the clay, so it's okay. So I'm going to add a little bit of the green powder here into our clear. And that is going to give us the ability to paint with color. Okay, and since the clear is going to turn out clear, the only thing that's going to really show is going to be the pigment that's in there. Now I'm noticing that once I add the pigment to it, the powder, it's going to thicken up, just like it would thicken up anything else. Okay. So I'm going to add a drop or two of the naphtha into my color here. Okay, to help thin it out just a little bit. There we go. We can actually get some movement with it now. There we go. And now I'm actually able to come in here and paint on it. Now you can buy all different kinds of colored pigment in powders. Powders are good. Just whatever powders you can get a hold of. Now I'm going to go ahead and heat and cure that. Okay, and you can see that we're starting to get some form of tint there. Okay, again, it's gonna be thin. It's not gonna be opaque. Now, if we wanted opaque, we could do the same thing, but using an opaque base. Okay, so let's go with we've got a little bit of white down here. We can do the same thing. So let's we're gonna add a little bit of the green, again, powder, to our white. This is going to allow us to go in here and paint now. If we were using a mold, you know, obviously this is going to allow us to do the paint on the inside of the mold to give us a different texture. Now I come in here and kind of stipple this on here to give us a texture since it's on the outside. And we're going to hit it with the heat gun. Now you can see we have opaque skin tone here. Okay. Now using a mixture of the opaque as well as the translucent, we can actually give it a really, really nice depth of skin technique here. So let's go now and add back in. Let's clean off our brush of the liquid clay here. Just try and get most of it off of there. Okay, now if we come back in with the translucent color, and we start to texture that into here, we're going to start to get some skin, some depth of skin in here. Now if I was doing this with human flesh, I would start with some reds at the bottom, some darker reds, and then start building my flesh tones on top of that. Okay. little bit more of the the clear, not the translucent, clear. And all the clear is going to do is it's going to act as a medium for the powder. So we're going to see more of the powder. It's just a suspension, okay? Just like any other medium, like a glue or anything like that. It's just a suspension in a liquid form. And so the color that we're adding here is the powder is going to be the part that is suspended in it. And so while it looks like it's coming on fairly thick and opaque, as it cures, the only thing that's going to be left over is going to be the pigment, since the clay itself is clear. So we're actually able to get some really nice depth here. So Hanson's asking, is this the same tint and powders and tints that you would use in resins? Yes, yes they are. Okay, so you can see now that we've got some texture. So we got some, you can see the shimmer that's in there. That's from the clear over the opaque that we used earlier. These are the tints that I'm using here. This is a Pearl X, Spring Green is the color that I'm using here. So we have different colors of the tint that we can use here. So we have, so this is a green, but I've also got all different kinds. We have like interference. I've got a nice copper here. This is a really like thick, chunky copper. But you can get them in opaques as well. So you can get all different colors. So we can tint the clear or the transparent, the translucent, which is going to have like a slightly milky color to it. Tint any of these colors with any kind of powder, it's going to allow you to paint this texture onto here. Now the nice thing about it is that it's now clay. Okay, it's now part of it. This isn't a paint. Okay, this is now part of the piece. We can actually come in here and, you know, abrade it with fingernail and whatnot, and it is actually still just the paint. Whereas you could literally pull the paint off of here, or if it gets wet, it'll start to bubble and such. This is a great technique for adding a permanent texture to, or paint to a piece. And remember, if we're back painting, then it'll come out even nicer. I'm gonna go grab that leaf that's in the oven real quick, and I'll show you how that one turns out. So give me just a second, I'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, whew, it's still very warm. But the clay came off of this side here, and that was the side that we had the little bit of clay, and just the clear on it. And then we have the leaf here. It's still a little hot, so I don't know if I'm gonna be able to remove it. Yeah, it's still too hot. And so this is what happens when it's too hot, is we get the acrylic paint sticks to the mold because we didn't let it cure completely, didn't let it cool. So again, no accidents here. Just I'm going to show you what it turned out to do. We did some aging and distressing here without knowing it, on the fly here, because the mold is too hot. So we can see now it looks like almost like it's a patina, like a patinaed copper. So if we come here, there we go. The burb is the word. Okay, so here's so if we flip this over, you can see the same technique. Now this is all clay. Keep in mind, this whole thing is made out of clay. It's not a plastic or anything like that. It is actually a 100% clay leaf, just like this one here is a clay leaf made out of that liquid clay. And you see it still has some flexibility to it, even though it's completely cooled down and such. This one here, the paint that we had that adhered to it, the paint is actually stuck inside of it. If I would have let the mold completely cure, like cool down to room temperature, and we peeled it out, all of this would have been green. Okay, so, but because I'm impatient and pulled it out, we have a nice patinaed looking leaf instead. But you can see we actually have texture on both sides now, though, as opposed to just the one side. Okay, so that's one thing that, so painting it with using a mold, like backfilling it with paint is one way to do it. We could backfill it with the tinted clay as well. We could make these entire things to just tint them so that when they come out, they're solid colors and such. But it's a really, really nice technique to create completely made out of clay versions of leaves or faces or hands and whatnot using these different colored clays. Now, another thing that I want to do is I want to show you guys how to do a wood grain technique. And I think wood and marble are like the two main faux finishes that people are after. Now, we did a little bit of the wood texturizing here and then using a little bit of the dry brush technique. But when you're getting into larger pieces, the one thing that you want to see is you want to kind of see that striation. Okay, the striation of the wood grain within the wood to create a piece, similar to how we do the marble here. But how we want to do that is we're going to use the same half sphere. If I had another mold lying around, which I do. Hold on a second. What this is this is a mold for a badge that says the Marshal of Mars. This is from an old show that I used to work I used to do the merch for. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to make this wooden sheriff's badge out of clay, but look like wood. But we're going to get a lot of different texture. There is a lot of texture. If I can zoom in on it, you can see there's a lot of texture in that mold. Okay, there's a lot of scroll work and such, that creating this out of actual wood would take hours and hours and hours. Again, because most of that scroll work is raised as opposed to a negative, okay? So the wood colors that we're going to use, because again, we can tint this however we want to as far as using powders go. I don't have a lot of wood powders available colors for me because it's not something that I do a lot of. Now I will be, because this is actually a neat technique, but also because I want to be able to show you guys the high contrast, the ability to do graining. We're going to be using our three main colors here of black, silver, and gold, with maybe a little bit of white in there, but not too terribly much. Okay. So what we're going to do is our main color is going to be this gold. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I want my wood grain to run horizontally across the badge here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create some of that wood just by slapping some color over the top of that. What? We're making a mess? Okay, we're going to do the same thing with the silver. We're just going to kind of fill in some of these areas here. Just a little bit here. Just a couple lines here and there. But Paul, this is highly irregular. This is messy. Messy's okay. And I'll show you why we got some on the outside as well. Because there's a reason. There's always a reason. And then we're going to use a little bit of black here. The black is going to give us some really nice high contrast wood segments here. Again, we want to keep it running across there. Always running in the same direction. We want this lateral movement. This looks like a mess, guys, I know, but believe it or not, there is method to the madness. There's always method to the madness. Now, taking a fairly wide brush, we're going to work in the same direction here. We're going to work in this horizontal direction here, okay? But the reason that I wanted an extra bit of clay here on the edges is because I want to be able to do a little bit of blending before we get in to the actual piece that we're working with. Now, if you notice, I'm going to fill in all the areas, but I'm just running the brush one time. I'm not working the clay, okay? We're just basically just covering the areas by running one direction, okay? Now, if we want to, as we're bringing the brush down, we can swirl it a little bit to give us a little bit of wood, like a thicker wood grain, okay? But we're working the outer edges of it too. I want to make sure that we got enough clay in there. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake it really quick. Okay, but because I know it's thicker in some places, it's not going to be 100% cured. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do it again. And this time I'm just kind of filling in the areas on the mold here. If I wanted to, I could just fill the whole thing in with this gold, okay? But since I'm kind of playing with the idea of the wood grain here, and now I'm just going to stay mostly inside the mold. I'm going to use a little pokey thing. That's a technical term, guys. Little pokey thing. It's just a... I'm just going to kind of move the color around a little bit. Again, the same thing like the brush, but just the surface area here. Now with this one here, see if I wanted to, I can come in here with the black, and we can kind of keep working the same angle. And with wood, depending on how the green was cut, I'm going to get these striations, okay, because it's cut at a slight angle. So we're just going to keep working these loops, okay. Now again, you can use this for a marbling technique too. I mean, there's again no wrong way to really do this, but it's just giving us the ability to create striations in clay, in liquid here, which is really interesting and fun to play with here. Okay. I'm going to kind of clean this up just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so while that is curing, I would like to we're going to try painting scales, because that's another technique that we can do with this faux finishing here. So the two main faux finishing that we do, and you can see we're getting a really nice patina there. That was an unexpected faux finish that I didn't even think about. It looks like we've got a nice faux finish here on that leaf. I think it's awesome. But you can see we can use these in the mold. We've done the marble, which turned out beautifully. Again, I really like the slight discoloration in this. And this is solid. I mean, it is solid clay. This is not a paint technique. This is actually a clayed technique. Again, with the backfill in there. Okay, and we got the different colors of marble. We can just keep doing this technique over and over again to create whatever piece we wanted. This is working inside of a mold. This is working inside of a mold. We've done, we've done some basic texturing here, okay, to create the pieces, the arm, to kind of give us this troll looking faux bark technique that's on there. And then I want to show you a scale, how to do scaling with some dimension using this clay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to use some of this paint, or clay, liquid clay paint here. And I want to start with, anytime that you're doing any kind of scaling or anything like that, you want to start at the lowest part and work up, okay? I'm going to pretend that we had already done this bottom part here, but you want to start at the bottom and work up. And then, because the brush is tapered, we want the low point of the scale to be facing towards the bottom there. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add a drop there, a drop next to it, make sure we still have enough clay on the brush here, that we're creating a little bubble. Okay, just a little bubble of it, and we're going to cure it. Okay, so that layer's done. Now you're really not going to start to notice this effect until about 10 layers in. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to come in between. We're going to do the same thing. This is one of those things that takes time, but your patience will pay off. And we're not painting here, guys. We're actually working with clay. We're just working with a really, really thin version of clay. Okay, so now I've got those drops dropped in there. Now, would this be a lot easier to do in the sculpt originally? Absolutely. But if you notice, I'm working with color here as well as texture. Okay, again, we're going into in between the middle of the scales, and we're just adding a little drop of the clay. Yeah, we could definitely do this into the actual sculpt using Super Sculpey, but because I'm actually working with a color, I'm able to get translucency and depth as well as the actual color in here. I'm going to do 2 more layers, and I'll put it up to the camera really close so you guys can see. So you can see here, it's subtle, but they're there. Okay, and if I kept going around here, the big thing with like sculpting in individual scales is we get like really aggressive with them, because so that they're visual, you know, we want them to be able to be seen. Either there are little scratches in there which don't look as good, or they are like, here is a triangle, 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 triangle. Like Swanee knows this one because she makes a lot of the dragon's eggs, and she makes them really pronounced so that they pop. Okay, if you wanted to go with something that looked actually a little bit more like skin on a on a lizard, it wouldn't, you know, lizard skin doesn't have like really pronounced ridges or anything like that. So you'd want to go with something that's a little bit more subtle like this. It is time consuming. So I'm going to put a series of dots. Spaced just apart, equally apart here. And I'm going to use my pokey thing. Again, technical term. I'm going to draw a line. I think this is where it's at, because I think that doing a little dab and then drawing it down So now if we look at that, so we're getting a definitely a, you know, and it's has a really nice subtle look to it. It is cured clay. Okay, so if we wanted to, there we go. If I come in with a little bit of paint, we just did a dry brush on it, so I don't think we want to. You can see we get a really nice texture on it. Actually, I kind of like it better when it's all black, but it definitely pops that. It pops that texture out there really nicely. I gotta say, I kind of like it better black, as far as just leaving it as the clay as opposed to actually coming in here and actually mucking it up with a little bit of the paint. So that allows you to do, I mean, but you know, you don't have to just do scales. I mean, you can work up any kind of detail that you want. I mean, if you wanted to do, let me see if we do flat like that. And we pull our clay. Okay, our piece is done there. Come in here and pull the other side. Then we can come in with our alternate colors. Look like liquid clay has huge potential in sculpting reliefs. It does. So if I come in here and just fill in these little gaps. Inside there, using my, and I mean, you don't have to just use a needle. You can actually come in here and you know, and if this was on a silicone pad, I could actually pull these pieces off too. I think as far as like conventional art, like creating art on canvas, I think there's a large application for using this as well to be able to get some really nice texture and relief as well. Come in here and fill this in. And the nice thing with it being a liquid is that it's adhering to the backer that I've got it on. And it's adhering to itself. So I mean, it's adhering to the old clay. So it allows me to come in here and create almost a leaf. A thin leaf, but okay, so here we have our wood grain sheriff's badge. It's hot out the oven, so I'm going to let it cool down first before we go and demold it. But then you'll see that the wood grain actually goes all the way through and will capture all the detail that we wanted in there. Let's start with trying to remove. Ooh, look at that. Oh, this is going to pop right off. And something else I'm noticing, which I'm really digging, is it maintains flexibility. Which leads to another application. Okay, see that flexibility that's in there? Of not just scales, but armor. Or further texture. I mean, and the nice thing is because it is still remaining flexible, like even those tiny little tips that are on there, they're not going to break off. Look at that happy little accident. So how would we apply it? Really simply, we use some super glue. So I'm just going to add a little bit of super glue here to the scales that we had. Just a little bit there. We're going to texturize our little dude here. And the nice thing about super glue and polymer clay is it sticks nearly instantly. Okay, Zoom asks, if that was to get wet, would it degrade or fall apart? That is a good question. So let us find out. So we're going to peel the leaf off of here. Okay. So you saw how well that peeled off. Experiments. I don't think so. It's a solid. It's just like, it's almost a rubber. So nope, it would not. It's pretty much it's a solid, and it's remaining really flexible. So to answer your question there, Zoom, not at all. You can dry it off. There we go. So now we have another leaf form there. So that's that was unexpected. I didn't expect that to happen. I love learning new things. That also means that cleanup would be fairly much a fairly decent chore as well. What I was really impressed with is the fact that it came off of this cardboard as well as it did. It's still matte, but it is able to peel up the entire thing. These kind of. So now what we can do is we can just kind of flex the mold here. besides the little bit of cleanup that we have to do. See that texture that's in there? So we're able to get all of that texture onto that piece. And we just come in here and we just kind of clean up these edges a little bit. It wouldn't be that hard to do. We've created ourselves, and that gives you an idea of how you do the wood grain as well. I mean, we've got like, here's like really thin wood grain or marbling, you know, and then, but on this other side, we've got the thicker wood grain kind of runs through there, and it still is able to capture all of that detail that we wanted in there before. But again, now, as we had mentioned before, you want to be able to do the wood grain with colors. You would want to tint the clay with the different colors of powders. But since you don't have to worry about them drying out, you can actually mix up little tubs of them and then use those to create your own wood colors and stuff, or any other kind of marble that you want to do. I mean, we did a lot of black and white because black and white was readily available, but if we wanted to do greens or grays, blues, anything like that, we just need to tint it with a little bit of powder. And what I really like about this is the flexibility that's left afterwards once it's cured. If we wanted to make it more rigid like these, we would just need to backfill it a little bit with a regular clay. But it allows us to get some really, really nice, it's got some good flexibility to it once it's all cured. That's a fun little, it's a really fun product to use here. So the Sculpey liquid medium. And then we also have the Primo clays that we have here that we can use as accents. So if I was to sculpt, say, this dragon again, what I would probably end up doing is sculpting it out of a colored clay like this Primo clay, so that he has a nice base structure to it, and then coming in here and adding the tiny texture of the clays and stuff around the outer edges there. Canadian Voodoo Shadow Box I'm making after the holidays. So yeah, you can kind of see that we've just got a lot of different, there's so much potential with this, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this stream in particular, is that the medium is here, but it was really kind of unclear as to all the potential that's out there. And I think just showing it in different in different processes, you get an idea that, like, it's pretty much sky's the limit, and it really comes down to the creativity that the individual artist is going to apply to it. But the things that I really like about it are the flexibility. I mean, that's a clay. That's hard to believe, but you know, like, I can open it up and it's not breaking. Okay, see, that's the really, that's how, and it's thin. It's wafer thin, guys. This one's a little bit thicker, but still we have the ability to do the same thing, just to kind of squish it up and it doesn't tear. Okay, even in thicker versions, we're still able to get some decent flexibility to it. What this tells me is that making action figures, making parts for action figures like hands and stuff, if you could get the tint the right color for flesh tone, you'd be able to get some actual movement into hands, feet, wings for fairy critters and dragons and such. A lot of good flexibility in teeth, that kind of stuff. I'm really digging how much versatility I've got here in this. The idea here for this being able to glue it down but still have the pokey bits, the really thin bits, to be flexible so they don't have to worry about them breaking off, is actually really nice too. I think there's a lot of potential that's built into this. If I were to do this piece again, all of these leaves would be made out of the exact same, out of this liquid medium, because I think I wouldn't fear them being destroyed as easily. Now, obviously, if the entire arm was made out of this, the arm would have a lot more flexibility to it as well, and it would be really hard to mold it, being as thin as it is. But mixing it with a different clay, like the Featherlight or something like that, as a core, to allow for some versatility in the movement of it, you'd be able to get some really, really nice pieces out of it. I'm loving this as an idea for fabrics, for clay fabrics. One of the hardest things to do with clay when making scale figures is to get a fabric that actually has some movement to it, but is also thin enough so that you it's in scale. And this is actually giving me some really good ideas as to how to do that. You know, I don't want to destroy this, but I really kind of want to see what the tear strength is. I'm really impressed with how nice it comes out. Okay, maybe we'll tear this leaf. So it does tear after a bit, but holy cow, it's got some good rigidity to it. So, and it's really only tearing where the two pieces come together. where it didn't bond very well. But that's it's got some really nice tear strength. All right. So there we go. So I think we've pretty much hit all the processes that we can do with this as far as faux finishing goes, and like kind of just really showcasing what this liquid Sculpey is capable of doing. So let's go ahead and we'll conclude it there. Well, thank you guys again for sticking with me on this fun-filled sponsored stream, sponsored by Polyform, the makers of Super Sculpey. I'm Paul Pape of Paul Pape Designs. You can follow me at twitch.tv/Paul Pape Designs. And until next time, remember to work smarter, not harder, and have fun with your Polyform, Super Sculpey, and Sculpey stuff.